So the government has very easily backed you into a corner. Invest, invest, invest. Now all that has changed. Now I would consider that to be an immoral double taxation on your savings, your pension, your hard work, and of course your sacrifice during your working lifetime.
So Thursday was budget day, and after what seemed like death by 1,000 cuts, especially in the financial press, the government has finally shown their intentions as well as their vision for the UK for the next 5 years. It is the biggest budget in recent memory, and it's raised £42 billion through various tax rises, but it's also changed the definition of the fiscal rules, which is going to allow an additional borrowing of £74 billion to meet their spending plans. Now, the budget, which has caused so much uncertainty, fear and foreboding, I'm finally relieved that all the nonsense and all the noise is now over, and we can all finally start to plan ahead for the future. So in this video, I'm going to be covering some of the greatest hits of the budget and how these are going to affect all of us, as well as offering some possible solutions for all of you in plain English. What I'm also going to be doing is creating more detailed videos over the coming weeks to explain some of these key changes for you and for your family. Now, I've also created a free budget summary flip book, which I'm going to make available to everyone. So all you need to do is request it in the comment section below and use the word flipbook. So welcome back to the Personal Finance crew, and if this is your first time, a very warm welcome to the Economies channel, where together we're going to be learning the language of money and wealth. And here we're also focused, we're dedicated and we're passionate about mastering money and making financial wisdom available to absolutely everybody. Hi, my name is Simon and I'm a chartered financial planner based in the UK. So why don't you follow me back to the studio and we can try and make sense of this landmark budget, as well as understanding how the effects of this are going to ripple through the UK, as well as our wallets for the next 5 years. So hopefully I'm going to see you all in a minute.
So as the UK is going to be grappling with economic uncertainty, the 2024 budget has brought a fresh wave of both anticipation and scrutiny. So we've got inflationary pressures, and we all know that they are squeezing our household budgets, as well as businesses who are also pushing for growth incentives, and the public, you and I, who are keen to understand what the budget means to all of us. Now, these announcements have been very important, and they hold huge implications for absolutely everybody. But will these measures ignite the economic growth that the UK desperately needs, or is it going to fall short due to competing political challenges as well as excess borrowing? Well, I'm going to try and walk you through and explain some of the key highlights as well as their impacts, but also some of my personal reactions surrounding this financial roadmap for the UK's future for the next 5 years. But before we get into all that, I'm going to pop up the usual disclaimer to say that this video is for education and for entertainment purposes only, and shouldn't be misunderstood or misconstrued as us offering financial advice. Now, for those of you who have been here before, you know that we love a good quote on this channel, and here's a very blunt assessment from Matt Godwin. The budget was a big tax, big debt, big borrowing, big state, big welfare, big immigration, big regulation, and all of this is to get a small economic growth of about 1.5%. He sums it up by saying that Britain's not working, and as always, it's the British people who've got to pay the price. So let's have a look at the greatest hits, and we'll break them down one by one. So number one, employers and national insurance contributions. Now, this was probably the biggest hitter in the whole budget. You may or may not be aware, but your employer also pays national insurance on your income, and that amount has been increased to 15%. Now, importantly, the salary that this applies to has also been lowered from £9,100 to £5,000. Now, that slight change in the band means that every employee is now going to have to pay an additional £615 per worker per year, and that's on top of the increases in the national insurance contributions as well. Now, overall, that's expected to bring in about £25 billion in taxes per year each year for the remaining 5 years of the government term. Now, Rachel Reeves has famously said that there's going to be no increases to taxes on working people. I've put on screen a section from the OBR report, that states that national insurance, whilst this is levied on employers, about 80% of that is going to trickle down and affect the employee. And that's going to show up in slower pay rises, fewer workplace benefits, less generous pension contributions, and of course, lower or no bonuses. Now, whilst in opposition, Rachel Reeves said that increasing national insurance on employers was a jobs tax. But here's another comment stating that the employer national insurance is going to mean that 76% of that cost is going to be passed through to the employer through lower wages. So in short, an increase in national insurance for employers is just a tax on workers via stealth and via the back door. So number 2 is personal allowance. And arguably, this is another big increase on the workers. Now, we've just been talking about tax by stealth, and the personal allowance has been frozen until 2028. Now, there's been a lot of talk in the financial press that the thresholds for these personal allowances could be frozen beyond April 2028, but that's actually not going to be the case. Now, if we're lucky, we do get pay rises most years, so that means that more people are going to be paying more tax more often as we all fall into the higher bands, and some of you will be either basic rate taxpayers or higher rate taxpayers for the very first time. And this currently generates a significant amount of income by freezing these thresholds, and it actually generates an additional £30 billion a year, but that could even be even higher, as I'm going to show on the chart on screen. Now, as you can see in the yellow bar on the left-hand side of this chart, this represents new taxpayers who were previously non-taxpayers. Now, the green bar is going to represent new higher rate taxpayers who were previously basic rate taxpayers. And you'll be able to see the grey line, which is rising up to the right. And this shows how much extra income is going to be generated in new taxes for the government. So as you can see, as we move towards the end of the chart in 2028, 2029, there's going to be about 7 million more people paying tax, generating an extra £45 billion a year for the government. And that is absolutely staggering. So number 3 is pensions. Now, from a financial planning perspective, pensions have been outside of the estate for inheritance tax assessment, which always meant that you could leave your pension to your loved ones and your family in a very tax efficient way. Now, all that has changed. Now, clearly there's going to need to be a process for paying tax on pensions, and to that end there's going to be a consultation period until April 2027, but clearly the plan is going to be to include inherited pensions as part of your estate for IHT purposes. Now, figures vary, but it's estimated at the moment that about 6% of estates currently pay IHT, but that is expected to increase to almost 10%. Now, what that means is this is going to generate an extra £3.5 billion a year, and that's on top of the already £7.5 billion per year that's collected with IHT, and that amount is rising significantly. So what you need to understand is that if your family does inherit your pension and you do need to pay inheritance tax in your estate, then your pension value is going to be automatically reduced by 40%. So if your family then withdraws the money from your pension as income, then this is also going to be taxed at their highest rate, and that could be either 20% or 40% income tax. Now, I would consider that to be an immoral double taxation on your savings, your pension, your hard work, and of course your sacrifice during your working lifetime. So the solution clearly is that you can spend it down now, but what that does mean is that you're going to have to pay extra income tax on the withdrawals. So the government has very easily backed you into a corner. So you're either going to pay extra inheritance tax or you're going to pay extra income tax. Either way, they're going to be getting more from your pension if it's inherited by your loved ones and your family. So number 4 is the state pension. So the government have confirmed that the triple lock is going to be in place for next year and for the foreseeable future. So what that means is the state pension is now going to be increased by 4.1% a year from April next year, or about £230.30 a week, £11,975 a year, and that's an increase of £473 in this year. So if you're finding value in this video, can you please hit the like and the subscribe button, as well as the notification bell as well, so we can get this financial wisdom to as many people as possible, and you can help us grow our personal finance community. So thank you so much for hitting that button. Okay, next is going to be inheritance tax, which we touched on earlier. Now, the rates have been frozen and they've been frozen since 2009 for the last 15 years, and they're going to be frozen again until 2030. Now, if the rates had not been frozen for those 15 years, it's likely that we would have been able to enjoy a much higher inheritance tax threshold, which would be closer to £600,000. But as it stands at the moment, the basic threshold is £325,000 each, and if you're passing your property down to your family, there's an additional £175,000 each. So what that means is we're all now going to be entitled to a maximum of £500,000 each, or £1 million as a couple. Now, I've linked our inheritance tax video to the end of this video, so you'll be able to watch that back at your leisure, and that's going to add some context to this very confusing tax. Next up is capital gains tax. Now, capital gains tax allowances have been absolutely decimated over the previous years, and they've fallen from an allowance of £12,300 to the current level of just £3,000. What that means is if you're a basic rate taxpayer now, you were paying 10% on the gains above this amount. The government has now in the budget increased that minimum level of capital gains tax to 18%, which is a huge increase. Now, high rate taxpayers won't feel as much pain. They were paying 20%. And they're going to be paying now 24%. Now, for most of us who are using ISAs and our pensions, there's no capital gains within these particular wrappers. But for those people who've got investments outside an ISA or a pension, perhaps they've got a crypto account, they've got an investment account, or even a trading account, taking gains in the future is now going to be a lot more painful. So if you're buying a second property, either as a holiday home or even as a buy-to-let, then the stamp duty is coming into effect immediately, and it's going to be increased from 3% to 5%. Now, I don't know about the wider market, but we've already received phone calls from clients who've either cancelled or postponed their purchase. So if you're selling a second home, the capital gains tax rates are 18% for a basic rate taxpayer and 24% for a higher rate taxpayer. Now, clearly, that's going to squeeze landlords or even those who are selling a family home to help their family out on the property ladder. Now, let's have a look at the minimum wage. If you're over 21, the minimum wage has increased to £12.21 an hour, which is great news for younger workers, but it's just an additional pressure for businesses, especially smaller businesses, who've now also got to find more money for the increased employer national insurance contributions. So that covers some of the main tax rises, totaling £42 billion each year, which is going to be levied on both businesses and indirectly on all of us, especially the workers. So what about the borrowing and the spending plans for the government announced in this budget? Now, be under no illusion whatsoever. This budget was absolutely huge, and it's the single highest increase in taxes on record, as shown in this chart from the OBR. Now, this is going to take the current tax burden to 38%, and this is expected to increase to 44% by the end of the government term in 2029. So overall borrowing, as you can see here, is massively higher each year than projected as recently as March this year. Now, this is huge excess borrowing this year and next year as well, before it slowly starts to slow down, but it's still mind-bogglingly high. Now, this is the highest extra borrowing since we were bounced out of the ERM in September 1992, and that was so bad it was then later called Black Wednesday. Now, the market's already started to get jittery yesterday as the cost on the scale of the government borrowing was announced. Now, I've had a look today, Friday, and the gilt yields are continuing to rise. What that means is the cost of servicing on national debt is a colossal amount of money, and the OBR estimate that this is £114 billion a year, or about £9.5 billion a month. That's just in interest payments. Let that sink in for a minute. So as a result of all that government borrowing and spending, the Institute for Fiscal Studies expect inflation to be increasing by about 0.4%. And that's going to put pressure on interest rates in general, and the Bank of England may not be as quick to lower interest rates when they meet in November. Now, clearly, this could mean more mortgage misery for millions of homeowners across the UK. So as a result, the OBR has actually downgraded both household income as well as household spending, as these tax rises start to filter through to our wages and of course to our pay packets. Now the budget was supposed to be invest for growth, but the jury is most definitely out on that statement at the moment. Now GDP has also been downgraded astonishingly despite all the spending and all the borrowing. Now GDP has also just recently been downgraded to anemic levels of just 1.5% growth a year, and that is despite the unparalleled injection of both borrowing and government spending. It's worthwhile mentioning that as a country we need a growth rate of about 2.9% a year, and that's just to match the increase of the bloated welfare state 30 or 40 years into the future. So in conclusion, this is a defining budget which is a tax, borrow and spend budget, and certainly sets the tone for the next 5 years. Now clearly, despite being glossed over in political language, these taxes are going to be a heavy burden and a heavy price to pay for both businesses and for workers alike. Now the borrowing is likely to have a positive boost to the economy in the early years before it starts to trail off in years 3, 4 and 5. And just like a financial junkie looking for the next fix after the initial high is worn off, I can bet that they're going to be back for even more money. And we can only hope that this money is spent wisely and we get value for money for all these increased taxes. Now there's actually going to be an office for value for money. I mean, I kid you not, and you can't even make this up. And that's going to be chaired by the famous David Goldstone. If you don't know who that is, he headed up HS2, and that cost the country £25 billion after running over budget multiple times before finally getting scrapped. Now I've added links to the Balancing the Inheritance Tax Tightrope video and another video about using your workplace pension so you're not going to be sleepwalking into a poorer retirement. Thank you so much for watching to the end and for your time and for your patience as always, and I'll see you all again next week.